My name is Linda Wells. I am the executive director for the Center for Entrepreneurial Studies here, and very fortunately classmates with all these guys, which was entirely by design. I found that when we have panelists who are classmates, they tend to play off each other better, and I figured since I organized 10 panelists this quarter, I'd pick on my friends. So we'll see if they're friends by the end of the session. The point of tonight, and we did this in conjunction with the Career Management Center and Rainbow Chen, was to talk about entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial ventures in the context of a career. As you'll hear, some of these guys have been entrepreneurs from the get-go and probably will till the day they die. Others had an entrepreneurial venture in the context of an ongoing career. So the point was to kind of talk about entrepreneurial options as in many different facets. Rather than me introducing you guys, why don't you do a quick introduction?
Sure.
And then we'll launch into some questioning.
Obviously, Fred Campbell, class of 93, obviously, as well. I'm working on my 5th company right now, a company called Lexi, which is in the mobile internet space. A company before that was a early .com called eGreetings, which I did with another classmate of ours, Tony Levitan, which some of you might have met. And then I've had an airline service business that provided just turnkey operations for foreign flag carriers working out of the flying in the United States on the west and east coast. And before that, I had a point-of-sale business for the California wine industry. And then prior to that, I had a nonprofit that I started for children, raising money for underprivileged children.
Good segue into
I was just going to say, perfect. I'm kind of like the opposite side. So I've done one company. I co-founded a company called Gear Goddess that was doing internet sports gear information for women. And my segue is actually I moved into nonprofit, and I work in social enterprise. And so we start businesses for the express purpose of training highly at-risk youth. So we actually run 3 businesses right now, but they're low-tech. So they're a cafe, a screen printing business, and a bike store, and we're looking to start a 4th. So that's kind of how
Before Gear Goddess, you also were in marketing, right?
Yes, I forgot about that part of my life. After business school, I worked in high tech, and worked in multiple startups, and kind of mostly in the software, telecom software, internet software space. And that's kind of what launched me into starting a company.
Hi, I'm Scott Bekemeyer, and after business school, co-founded an airline called Sierra Expressway, which flew out of Oakland. After that airline, I ended up raising a search fund and buying a company that was in the fire protection industry. Managed that company for about 9 months until September 11th happened, and it really shrunk our volume in one of our major markets and one of our areas where we were concentrated, and ended up selling a portion of that company to the original founder, back to him, taking what remained and growing that over a period of time, and then unfortunately ended up selling and liquidating what remained of that, and from there went on to join Zillow, which is a online real estate company that was based in Seattle, was one of the original people there. Survived through the first iteration or 2 of the business model, but then ultimately did not want to go up to Seattle full time, and am now down at Zip Realty in Emeryville here, heading up their business development function and starting businesses there. I've started a couple of businesses, one in mortgage and one in insurance, and continuing entrepreneurial ventures within a larger company.
Hi, I'm Chris Lien. I was an investment banker before going to the GSB and came out and did that again for about 7 years. And then my final project in banking was helping Kmart to set up its internet business called Blue Light, which was at the kind of the peak of the bubble, and did that whole thing there, and then rolled that back into Kmart, and then started and sold a small software company. Then I helped a friend run his bootstrapped business. It was an online marketing business, and then from that I've now started another software company which is developing a paid search management application, a control panel, if you will, for paid search advertisers. And I've been doing that for almost a year now. So kind of banking, very traditional, and then stumbled into being an entrepreneur. So
Now, Scott and Fred, you both started businesses right out of business school. And Scott, did you start a business before business school too? I can't remember.
I did. I started a company called JobLink, which was a before online, but a job placement company.
Okay.
Computerized employment.
Both
service.
came in with entrepreneurial experience. And actually, this wasn't on the list of questions I sent you, but I'm going to lob it at you anyways.
Okay.
What did you do while you were in business school to kind of prepare yourself to start, for both of you, another venture out of business school? Do you have recollection? I know it was a long time ago for all of us. Do you have recollection of kind of how you used your business school years to prepare?
You know, I don't know that I used them as wisely as I probably could have.
Well, then what would you have done?
What I truly enjoyed, though, was...
They still have a few months to save it.
I love just hearing other people's experiences. And the second year, especially for me, I thought was so much fun because people came in and described what they did. And across any variety of industries and roles, I just found that extraordinarily fun. And getting that insight into people's challenges and how they handled it was, I thought, my best preparation going forward. And I came to appreciate that there really is a network, not only of the GSB, but also just friendly entrepreneurs out there who want to see you succeed and are there to help you out and will lend advice and, in some cases, capital to your efforts. And getting integrated into that community was fun. And there are a lot of people out there who are willing to lend their time and support you.
What I did, I knew I wanted to start another company. And I started networking with classmates. Tony and I spent a fair bit of time our first year talking about what we might do. He wasn't sure if he wanted to be an entrepreneur or not. But we agreed that in the summer between first and second year, we would start up a consulting firm that we would get a project, try to get two at least, where he would lead one and then I would lead the other. And that worked really well. The name of the company is Summer Associates. It's free. You can use it if you want. Or better known to our client is just abbreviated version of some asses. And then our second year, we did a 390 on exploring business opportunities. That was really useful. Professor Holloway was our professor. And that turned out to be just, you all know Professor Holloway, or most of you probably do. He's just an amazing guy. And Professor Holloway ended up being on our board for e-greetings and is now on our board again for Lexi. So it's been a great opportunity to get to really know a professor in that process. So it was time well spent. So.
And I remember you and Tony I was in your 353 study group. You're probably greatly humored I'm in this job because I was like a deer in the headlights in that class in school. Can you two, Scott, and well, of course, Fred had started a venture beforehand, talk to kind of what issues you dealt with in terms of credibility, possibly, or making up for things that were lacking in your background as you started a company out of business school?
Yeah, I had probably one of the more non-traditional paths out of business school, and that was to start an airline. And I joined the original founder of a commuter concept out of Oakland, and our idea was to extend the Southwest style of service with low fares and high utilization to smaller markets that were monopoly served by United Express at the time. And neither one of us had any airline background, and we were relatively young and didn't have a lot of general management background. And as you can imagine, those conversations were somewhat awkward with capital providers as they looked at us and said, well, what do you guys bring to the table? And it was funny that some of our strengths were ones that we didn't necessarily recognize. And British Aerospace, which manufactured the plane that we ultimately selected and used in the airline, the Jetstream, coincidentally was looking for a business plan to support because they had 400 aircraft that were coming off lease from United and American. They were subject to head leases. They owned these aircraft, and they needed to basically place them in service and generate revenues for the next 5 years. And they needed to take equity roles in small startup businesses to do that, and they were looking for a prototype business to support and then model that worldwide. Into that situation, Dan and I walked, and they were actually attracted to the fact that we weren't pilots. We had selected an opportunity because we thought there was a financial return associated with it. And their credibility really gave us a lot of credibility as we went out and ultimately successfully raised the capital we needed for the airline. Our attitude had always been, there's a lot that we don't know. We'll state that at the outset, but we bring energy and good judgment to the table. And in the particular areas where we needed operating expertise, we believe we could hire that in, and we did successfully hire that in too.
With myself and Tony, well, prior to meeting Tony, I like picking things that really nobody knows anything about anyway. So you can be a doofus and still get away with it. So when we teamed up to do e-greetings, this was 1993. There was a handful of people. You could fit half of you would represent everybody who knew anything about the web at that point in time. And quite frankly, we're in a similar situation here with our mobile internet play. Is there's just not a lot of people that know what the heck we're even talking about. So when we don't know what we're talking about, it really doesn't hurt us all that much. As long as the story is interesting, people will pay attention. So unlike Scott, where he actually knew what he was doing, or it's serious business. I suggest if you don't know what you're doing, get into something that nobody else does either. So,
good advice. Caroline and Chris, you did not do your entrepreneurial ventures right out of school. Did you know when you graduated that you wanted to be an entrepreneur, or that was somewhere in your future?
I didn't. I knew that I wanted to play some senior role at a company or be a senior advisor, or just to have impact on whatever business situation I was involved in. But it was more a fluke. I wouldn't have predicted. My friends still marvel because most of them are very senior private equity and investment banking guys, and they still think I'm the strange one. I kind of fell off the path. But it makes for a more interesting life. And also, to Scott's point, if you look back in the backgrounds of many entrepreneurs, many of them came to their initial venture fortuitously, and that way you come to it authentically. And I think that would be one of the biggest takeaways from this kind of panel, because I was trying to think, was there some plan I'm following, or what advice could I impart, if there's any advice I have. And it's really just to have a passion for whatever it is you're doing. And in my own experience, that's usually if you've come to something authentically, you're trying to solve a problem that you've encountered or someone you know has encountered, and that'll usually lead to better success, or at least greater motivation to try to be successful. But no, the headline is I didn't attend business school thinking I would be an entrepreneur.
I didn't come to business school even knowing what an entrepreneur was that well. Although my dad had started a company, but it just hadn't really occurred to me. But when I was here and I worked with a lot of startups, I was really intrigued, and I liked the energy and the passion and the sort of single-minded focus of being in startups. And so I decided, I was pretty sure that I wanted to be a part of starting a company, but I had no ideas. So I wasn't sort of just going to try and, get out of business school, work a little bit, and then start my company. But I knew I wanted to do something entrepreneurial, or I thought I did. But my plan was I needed to get experience first. I came from the public sector, so I had even less experience than everybody else in terms of talking about it. So I felt like I wanted to go to a small company where it still wasn't too, it wasn't so out of the realm of startups, but I wanted to get some experience for a while, and then I was going to go do something entrepreneurial.
Now, Caroline, you spoke a little bit about what you deliberately did in trying to build up your skill set to be an entrepreneur. What, if anything, did the rest of you do, either deliberately or in hindsight, was a good thing to do in preparation for being an entrepreneur?
Meet a lot of your classmates would be one thing that comes to mind. I mean, we're among the GSB community. You won't know until you're a couple years out of school how blessed you are that you're a member of this community. If you work even within your class, forget about across classes, there's some expert who knows whatever you're trying to deal with, or who's dealt with it before within the GSB community, or they can connect you with someone. And so, I think that was one of the best things I did. Scott joked that he maybe didn't spend his 2 years as wisely as he could have, and I can remember blowing off a lot of 8 a.m. advanced taxation classes, which maybe was a healthy thing to do. But meeting people was something that I had focused on, and just getting to know your classmates. And you'd be surprised. Those ties will last.
And professors. Take the time, get to know your professors. They're an
Absolutely.
amazing resource that you'll continue to call upon I haven't seen Peter Wendell since when we were raising money for e-greetings, but a call into him not too long ago was greeted with, oh yeah, no, I remember you guys, yeah, great, oh yeah, what can we do for you this time, and who can we introduce you to? So, amazing resource.
Scott, did you do anything deliberately or not deliberately to kind of prepare you for an entrepreneurial career?
I was less deliberate, and sort of to Chris's point about how you get to things authentically, I didn't know that I necessarily knew what I was going to do after I graduated. I wanted to do something entrepreneurial. And I think the advice I had heard at the time, which was wise, was even if you can't figure out exactly what you want to do, sort of point yourself towards that direction and put yourself in a position where there's a lot of action going through your role. And through that, you will gain great experience. And I think I've come to appreciate that you can be entrepreneurial in a lot of different roles, truly across a lot of different industries in the public sector, in private sector, in big companies and in small companies. So don't set your definitions too narrowly as you look at those roles. I think you're going to be able to find a lot of things that might appeal. As I was going into this and thinking about advice, I was thinking sort of entrepreneurs, I think, need a particular work environment. And it's sometimes hard to put your thumb on it, but you oftentimes know when you don't have it. But it's very hard to decide exactly how to get to what you want to find. And it's like true friendships. I think it's hard you might have a diversity of friends, but it's sort of hard to say, well, gosh, that person's going to be my friend. I'm going to work on a plan to get there. It just sort of happens, and you sort of move towards it. And just put yourself sort of in the path of action, and good things will occur.
One of the things that I did that you probably are doing anyway is get to know yourself really well and get to know what you like, what you don't like, and using that word authentic is an important one. I spent a lot of time in business school. We had a lot of great opportunities to do that. I think about the creativity in business class, and I think about, I don't know, all the different things we did in the PNP. But those things were really helpful to me because it allowed me to define. I kind of went from the inside out as opposed to saying I want to be an entrepreneur. It was, well, I like these kind of environments, or I like using these kinds of skills, or I need to be in a place where I have these kind of people around me. It just so happened that ended up being an entrepreneurial environment.
The few little things I know you've heard these before, but they're definitely true for us. Is when you're a student, Stanford, nobody is going to turn you down if you call them or write them and say, can I spend a half an hour talking to you about your business, doing research on this or that. We use that a lot and never got turned down. The other thing that we did was we for years after Stanford, we never paid ever to go to a conference, and we'd go to any conference we wanted to. And that is incredibly helpful if you're starting a company on a budget. And so you can usually get in if you're a student at Stanford, or any student probably. But some places only have a substantial discount. They won't let you in for free. So what we did, and so write this one down, this is definitely going to save you some serious money. We started a newsletter. Now, my mother and Tony's mother were the only two people on our newsletter. But we went in all the time as members of the press, and it works phenomenally well.
Fred still gets into the e-conference for free.
It works. So I absolutely take that one, put it in the bank. So
remember, you're on video.
Great idea.
no, it's you're not lying. This is a true thing. You're going to start a newsletter about your specific industry, so it's a good thing.
And this is not my questions, but you and Tony knew you wanted to start a company, but you weren't sure exactly what it is you want to do. Do you want to talk a little bit about the process that you guys went through?
Sure. So, as Chris said, it's all about passion. So, we were up on the 18th hole at Stanford. We're both passionate about golf. We're terrible golfers, but we're still passionate about it. And we came up with an idea for the business, which was a way to make your golf better using technology. And that led to one thing and another, and eventually literally led to e-greetings. So I guess the moral of that story is that Tony and I have this philosophy where you just keep on saying yes, and you keep on looking at whatever it is that you find interesting, and then you apply your screens to it, and eventually, generally speaking, the idea is not going to pan out at one level or another. But the way I look at it, the way Tony looks at it, is that just means that it's just leading you down a different path. And when finally the doors are all opened and your screens work, it works financially, you can raise money behind it and all that stuff, then yeah, you've got it. You're passionate about it. It's there. All the pieces are there, and you're ready to rock and roll. So it's more serendipitous than anything else. But we kept on, having an interest in starting a company. It had to be something we were interested in, something that would affect people's lives positively, and we just let it kind of roll out. So it happened.
Caroline and Scott, you two in particular, who have started companies and have now rolled into more traditional jobs, do you want to talk about that transition and how having an entrepreneurial experience affected you either positively or negatively?
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I think because I had always defined what I wanted to do not on the job or the type of job, but on the elements that were important to me, it was a really easy transition. Because I said, I need passion, I need to be doing something that I think matters, I need to be able to do something that's creative, that I can start things from scratch, I need to be able to, I kind of had factors in play. Actually, it may sound kind of silly, but moving to nonprofit was a complete natural thing to do. After the company that I co-founded, I worked for someone else's startup, and then I switched into nonprofit. But the nonprofit I switched into is a nonprofit that runs businesses to train youth. So it's entrepreneurial, just in a kind of different setting. And so I didn't have to, all those elements were there. I mean, the passion certainly is there in nonprofit, the mission, the focus of what we're doing and why we think it's important. So all those factors were already there. It was actually a very easy transition. And in fact, I was able to talk to that in the interviews, and nobody really blinked. I think when they saw it on the resume, they kind of didn't get it. But when I talked about how I thought it was so similar, and I also, I know how to beg, because being an entrepreneur, you learn how to beg. And I continue to beg now. In fact, if anyone wants to donate to our nonprofit, ggci.org. So it was, I know how to work in an environment with very few resources. I know how to have to completely recast yourself all the time and rethink things when things change. The environment changes, funding changes, it changes the work that you do. That's like the work in a startup. So it was actually a really simple transition, I think, for me.
What she's not telling you is I begged her to come work here. She turned me down.
Still let me speak.
That's right. Scott?
It's been sort of strange for me because it's now I'm working at a place where I didn't either start or buy the company. And I've only done that for 3 years out of, I think, my 20-year employment history. And I'm liking it surprisingly a lot. I like the people I work with. I like the challenges I'm working on. And I'm getting to do entrepreneurial things and not sweating payroll every week. And that's kind of a neat feeling for me today. And whether I say they're long term or not, I don't know. I'll probably go off and start another company, I imagine. But I'm amazing myself that I found a place that I really do enjoy. And it's largely through not only the challenges, but the people that I work with. And I really enjoy that. Some of you may be thinking that you're shutting doors if you consider an entrepreneurial path, and that if it doesn't work, that it might besmirch your resume somewhat. My best story to that one was after we shut the airline down, I had to go out and raise money for the search fund. And I was introduced to a chairman emeritus of a Fortune 500 company who had this wonderful wood-paneled office on Sand Hill Road. And everything just exuded success and doing everything right. And I walked in there, and he sat me down on his couch, and he said, "Scott, tell me about this airline. Why did you do it?" And we talked about the airline. And he said, "All right, so how much money did you lose?" And I said, "Well, our investor lost $4 million, and our partner lost in-kind support of about $2 million. And I was expecting him to sort of give me the polite shuffle out of the office. And he looked at me and he said, "That's nothing." He said, I lost $1 billion on the airline I bought. And he proceeded to tell me about his failed airline acquisition and the $1 billion in market cap and losses that it had generated. And he said, you're lucky. You know, you got out for only $6 million on somebody else's dime. Way to go. And I'll invest with you. And it was just such a little bolt of all right, you know, you can walk away from something that wasn't entirely the way you wanted it to be, but you still can come out with some great experiences that other people value as well, and in unexpected ways and in unexpected places. So keep that in mind, too.
Now, Irv Grousbeck has coined the term becoming constitutionally unemployable after having been an entrepreneur. I'm married to an ex-entrepreneur, so I've watched the transition back into a real job, and I know there's some downside to it, and somebody didn't turn off their cell phone. I can hear it.
Tony and I have spent quite a bit of time talking about that as well.
Yeah. I mean, what are your comments on that?
Well, I toyed, and I think the recruiters knew I was toying with it. I was like, well, okay, what would it be like going interviewing with, you know, McKinsey or something? And I just couldn't take the question seriously. And when Tony, when we left eGreetings in '99, Tony played golf for a while, and I traveled for a while, and his wife eventually said, you know, you got to get a job, you got to do something. And this is something that Tony and I have talked a great deal about. It's kind of like the Matrix. Tony had taken the blue pill, and his ability to just and Scott, I think, was fortunate. He works now for a company that he can be an entrepreneur, and they value that. Tony was having a trouble finding a situation where companies really valued his entrepreneurial background. I know that I am now unemployable. Really, nobody's going to want me to work for their company unless I'm running the company.
Or do you want to work for them?
Then I wouldn't want to work for them anyway, so I guess it works out fair. But I think Tony had a little bit of a difficult time with that because he interviewed for quite a long time and would get through a number of the interviews, and he didn't have the experience Scott did. He unfortunately came across, or fortunate for me anyway, I should say, he came across CEOs and employers who were intimidated by his experience. So, you know, I think realistically there is a downside to being your own boss and having run your own company, and so I think you can have Scott's experience, but you can also end up with Tony's experience as well. So.
Scott, how did you find your position both with Zillow and Zip Realty?
You know, actually, both of them through friends and business partners. With Zillow, the president of Zillow and I went to school together and started JobLink together. So it was a prior personal and professional relationship. And he had seen what I had done and said, hey, come on board, let's get the band back together. And then with respect to Zip Realty, I'd been looking at some of the mortgage opportunities for Zillow. And a classmate of ours, Gary Beasley, was CFO of Zip Realty. And I had called him, and we had decided we'd have breakfast. And I said, Gary, you know, there are really some opportunities you guys are missing. Why aren't you focusing on them? And he said, well, you know, let's come and talk. And about that time, I wasn't going to commit to Seattle, and one thing led to another, and I joined Zip Realty. So,
And then Gary left you.
And then Gary left. But he'll be here in a couple of minutes to explain himself. So we'll
He's teaching
be excited
356
for that.
this quarter with another classmate of ours, Jim Ellis. I'm going to go ahead and open up to questions if you guys have some questions you want to lob at these guys. Jessica?
When you're talking about becoming constitutionally unemployable, can you imagine an entrepreneurial path where you build in experiences or work on other projects or have a certain type of role in the companies you start so that, I don't know that you could be less that way if you wanted to be, or have you seen entrepreneurial paths where you do go back and forth quite a lot and that's helpful?
It's just hard if you're the CEO and you leave business school and you're the CEO. You're thinking about everything. I mean, Scott talked about payroll, which is like what would hang most over your head if you were having funding issues. It's just very hard to then drop out of thinking about everything because you own it, whether it's successful or fails, it's yours, and then drop back into, well, I'm just responsible for, being the CFO or being the product manager or running marketing. So I think that's just a tough transition. I think it's easier if before being a CEO you were particularly strong at one area, so maybe you would just fall back to that because you'd have such domain expertise. Again, I fall back on like product management or marketing or something, sales. But it's when you're the CEO, and this is something you guys all have to think about. Do you really want that responsibility? You're thinking about everything all the time. It's never done, and so forth. And to shut that off, I think that would be a hard transition.
I also think it depends on obviously priorities change throughout your life, and it depends on when I was doing the entrepreneurial thing, like most people, you're working pretty much all the time. And I came to a point where I decided I don't really want to work all the time. I mean, I love what I was doing, something I was passionate about. I was doing something focused on sports gear for women. It was great. But nothing would make me want to work that many hours. And so, and I also think it depends on what role you're playing, as you were saying, Chris. So to be an entrepreneur doesn't mean that you have to be the CEO running the show. It can mean that you're a co-founder or a partner with someone. It can mean that you play the COO role, which is a role that every company needs. Or I shouldn't say every company, but for the most part, you're maybe more internally focused. And so I actually think it could be that way. Again, it just depends on why you're an entrepreneur and what role you're playing. Some of those things naturally transition into other jobs.
And there's some halfway houses out there too. Things like entrepreneur in residence is a great sort of way station.
Yeah.
Being a consultant in an industry for a while and then jumping in. So there are situations where you can survive and earn a little bit of money and then jump in again too.
Yeah.
I like that, halfway houses. Recovering entrepreneurs. Yes.
It really does get back to your personal sort of disposition, if you will. If, as Chris said, you were really used to, you liked running the whole show, that's going to come through in an interview and it may not work particularly well. But if you're more than happy to be part of a team and not have that responsibility, I think as Carolyn is saying, I can fit in, I'm not sure I want to be thinking about it 24/7, that's going to come through too, and people are not going to be intimidated by it. I just interviewed a gentleman this morning for our fifth employee of the company, a product development manager that we're hiring, and he's eminently qualified for the job, just amazing, a gentleman who's had 2 companies he's been running for the last 5 years. And when I interviewed, it was just clear that he was, what Chris said, he was just used to running the show. And it just, you're just not going to work. But when we hire our 7th or 8th employee and it's a senior position and it's the head of all the business development, I think this guy would be great. So it kind of just depends.
Yes.
Clearly in an entrepreneurial venture, very few of you. It's like you and one other, or you and 2 others. Can you talk about your selection of the people, either that you joined? What sort of filter you helped use as your judgment without references or just talking to people? How did you know that there was the right fit, chemistry, and that it could be sustainable?
Good question. Do you want to talk about it?
Sure. That is the key. I mean, if you can get that one, I think you're more than halfway there. It's somebody, I think it was at the conference we just had. What's more important, a great idea or the great team? And I think the gentleman who was speaking from Disney, or Pixar, said, his take was the great team, and I'm the same way. A lot of great people here at Stanford, and there was, I think, 30 of our classmates who knew they wanted to start a company up, and so we would sort of, start hanging out together throughout the whole, especially towards the middle of our second year when people were making that hard decision. Okay, I'm not going to interview. I'm really going to start a company up. Tony and I couldn't be happier with our decision. And I think working together in the summer helped us figure out whether or not we could work together. But we still had some real serious troubles. I had money from my prior companies, and Tony was paying off debt, and as he likes to say, trying to figure out how to use his diapers inside and out on his children. We were in very different financial situations. So that
Sadly, I could see Tony doing that.
Yeah, that was tough. But
Now, when did you and Tony? Because you had a good runway in business school to kind of have an opportunity to work together. Did you guys connect in first year?
We connect. Well, we were part of the
that's right.
math camp. Because I'd been out of school for 10 years or something, and then Tony because he was mathematically disabled. So we got together then, and that actually you're all beyond that. But I would say go to math camp if you were just coming to Stanford. Oh, they are. Oh, it's too bad. It's a great program. Are there tricks? I'd say, can you communicate? That's number one. Do you have similar sort of goals, passions? I've seen some horror stories with classmates who come out here, and they don't have the same work ethic. They don't communicate. One's more reserved. One wants to talk about stuff. One wants to, let's just build it to sell. One wants to build it as a lifestyle. You don't belong together. So, just a lot of talking, a lot of figuring out, as Carolyn is saying, who you are, and then try to match that up. But if you can get that, I think you're halfway there.
How did you connect with your partner, Caroline?
Actually, so what happened is when I knew that I wanted to start a company or be part of it, but I had no idea. I knew I needed to find a business partner, and I actually wanted to work with someone else doing it. I didn't want to do it alone. And what happened is, this was during the era where it was actually a lot of businesses were starting, so there was a lot out there. And I started interviewing business partners. And what I found is that in the interview process, it was too short. I was going to be spending my life in this company, or a big part of it. I didn't want it to just be that casual. So I decided to actually do consulting to founders or to people who were looking for founders. And I said, okay, I'll do a project with you, but I'm not ready to commit to being a business partner. And I did that for a year. And I remember it was amazing because I cycled through 3 companies or 3 people, basically. I got to the 4th person who had this idea, and we did our project together, and it was clear. We got really excited about working together. There was passion, there was a lot of similarities, but being sort of, compulsive, we did Myers-Briggs together, we did Enneagram, we talked about our goals. We went through all of this. And then we said, okay, I think we can work together. We've been working together for 3 or 4 months as kind of as partners in consulting. Let's do it. And it was a great way of doing it. So it was very deliberate.
Some of the things that they've touched on, which I think are important, are values and making sure that your values are there. And it's oftentimes very hard to discover somebody's values until you're in the middle of a very tough decision and a tough situation. So to your point, I think that's great if you can actually spend real quality time with somebody. I'd also extend that idea up to your investors as well, and then also to your employees, and that a value and congruence throughout that team is absolutely important. So look for it not only in your partners, but also up and down too.
Yes.
Quick question about passion. So how important do you feel that passion is towards the actual experience and the day-to-day things that you do versus passion about the ultimate product or service that you provide? A lot of people could be passionate about, widgets, but if everybody else is producing widgets, chances are your company may not succeed. So I think about that.
So I thought about this So I thought about this a lot because the idea that my business partner had was this internet site, Consumer Reports, if you will, on sports gear for women. I was passionate about that. She was passionate about that. So I thought, great. And it was a little naive in retrospect because once we started working, neither of us had any time to work out. We'd go to these, it was pathetic. We were the most unhealthy people for 2 years. Everyone else was loving the company. People who worked for us were working out and testing gear. And we were sort of dreaming about stepping down from our roles of being gear testers. So I thought what I learned from that experience is it's actually important to be passionate. For me, it was important to be passionate about what I did every day. And so that meant the people. Nothing, luckily or fortunately, I was passionate about working with my business partner, but the whole team, I needed to like what I was doing day in and day out. And so when I ended up moving into nonprofit, I sort of took that lens with me. And now not only am I passionate about the outcome, but I'm passionate about what I'm doing day in and day out. And that's important because that's kind of what's the substance of what your life is about. But it probably depends on the person. That was just my take.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be periods, if your passion is getting something off the ground, there's going to be day-to-day periods where you're not probably super excited about what you're doing, but it's a necessary evil. You'll meet very few people who are like passionate about fundraising, for example. But without funds, you can't pay for your venture, for example. And day to day in a small company, especially if you've been at a big company before you were an entrepreneur, and you're like in charge of payroll and FedEx, and hey, the kitchen's out of stock, but at the same time you have to go interview the VP of sales and talk with your board members. I mean, your span of your job, you may have passion for certain of those daily activities, but ultimately, ideally, you have passion for, hey, I'm building my company, I'm advancing my idea, I'm getting closer to getting into the market type thing. But don't, to what Carolyn's saying, there are days when you're an entrepreneur where it's necessary and you understand why you're doing it, but let's not kid ourselves. I mean, there's some real drudgery involved.
Someone has to vacuum.
Yeah.
I would also say that on the I've started companies by myself, and I would never do that again. It's just to keep that sort of energy up is daunting. So when I'm not, the recruiting or the more likely the raising money didn't go well and we got turned down by somebody or whatever, and I'm down. Tony's usually not. We usually are not kind of doing the same wave. We're opposites or something else. And that was the other thing about partners. What kind of gets you down and what gets you up. That we balance each other out nicely on that as well. So there's probably a few days where one of us is not passionate about something that's going on, and if the other guy is down, then that's okay. Or if today I've got to go stock the refrigerator at Costco and I really don't want to do that, or my drudgery is all the bills get stacked on my desk. Why I get stuck with having the check register is beyond me, but that's what I get to do.
Remember, Tony's the math derelict.
I know,
that's
probably why. But so I get to write the checks, and I hate doing that and coding them. But got to do it.
Yes.
You spoke a little bit about flipping diapers inside and out. And so my question is kind of related to that in that I don't know what your situations were when you guys were starting out, if you had families or not, or how do you see that kind of playing a role in what you do and how that kind of influences what risks to take and things like that?
Well, I suspect that is so personal, your risk assessment. I mean, at a fundamental level, it may sound bizarre. I don't really believe in risk. I sort of, if something doesn't go right, then that's just the way it's supposed to be, and you kind of pick the pieces up and go. But on the other hand, I don't have children, so Tony's assessment of risk is very different now. And when risk comes in a lot of different forms. So Tony's not willing at this venture to spend the 24/7 that we did in the last venture, because he said, I don't know, my children's first 6 years, I never spent any time with them, and I'm not willing to do that again. Managing sort of everything is very different for Tony now than it was back then. And where I would probably be fine raising, we were looking at kind of how much we wanted to raise our first round, and I thought, let's get $500,000. We'll do a beta, we'll test the beta, and we'll take that out and raise $5 million, and we'll raise it at a much higher valuation so we can keep more of the company. And Tony was not comfortable with that, so we compromised and we raised $1 million. Just so we have a longer run rate, we can pay ourselves a few more dollars, and so things can work out a little bit easier at home on the home front for him. But it's you got to manage that risk, I guess, on a day-to-day basis. And if Tony's kids are sick and, or whatever, he's going to have a different assessment that day than I do, again, when I don't have children, so.
Do you guys want to speak to that? You all were in different places when you started companies.
Yeah, I mean, you're fortunate, given where you're coming from, meaning the GSB, that within a couple months, you can scrap together, within, say, 6 months, you could scrap together enough money that if it's a very small team, you could draw some kind of salary. It's a very personal decision. If you have like a child who needs health care all the time and has some chronic disease, then it's probably not a prudent thing to go bet it all on black as an entrepreneur. But if you're either single or your wife or your partner is in sync with what you're doing, and it's not faxing bricks, which is my favorite example of bad businesses to pursue, give it a go. And as Scott talked about, and I certainly, my first venture, Blue Light, was a giant flop, even though we returned the capital to the investors. But you benefit from that, and eventually it'll lead to something that makes sense. But it needs to work personally for you. I don't think anyone could make that decision for you.
Yeah, I would not underestimate the support that you do need at home or from your sort of life partner in going out on a venture like this. In my case, I was very fortunate. My wife worked, and we didn't have big needs and held off having kids for a while too. So we're able to do some crazy things without too many financial and personal obligations early on in our life. And she's always been very supportive, which has given me quite a bit of confidence to go, and that I wouldn't disappoint her or what she had hoped to see out of what we were doing together. So, however, I've seen where there has not been that support, and that's really hard. It's really hard. So just make sure it's all synced up.
Other questions? Yes.
And if you want to start up a company eventually, would it ever make sense to work for a VC for a couple of years?
Sure. I mean, why not? I mean, if you don't know your idea now, that's a great, I don't know that they would call themselves halfway houses, but it's basically you get to sit on the side of the highway and watch every model of car go by, and you'll eventually find one that'll interest you, or more importantly, it may not have been a business that would have particularly been interesting to you, but back to that team idea, you might meet the executives and think, wow, I really connect with this founder or this founding team and want to go work with them. But yeah, I don't think anyone will ever look at you and say that was a dumb thing to do. It's very hard. I remember graduating, and I went to an investment bank, and you feel like you have this your ticket coming out, and how are you going to punch it? Are you going to go? I had two buddies, Jim and Kevin, who took a year to look to buy a business, and I remember, wow, I was honest with myself. I didn't have the balls to go do that. I mean, I didn't have that passion to turn down all the jobs and just believe in myself that I would find the right business. So, if you want to balance the risk, and also if you're unsure, I think that's a good place to go. Would I go work in a coal mine? No, you're not going to see as much there. But at a VC firm, I mean, that's already, you're in the ecosystem of venture formation and new business formation. So I think that would only be positive.
And to add my editorial comment, because I get that question all the time, I mean, a lot of it depends on what your background is, too. I think having operational experience is so critical, because, I mean, if you talk to most of these folks, I'm asking where most of their challenges have been in running companies. I got $20 that says it's going to come down to managing people. And you're not going to get a whole lot of chance to do that in a venture firm. So, I mean, if you can kind of learn how to manage people, and I always say, if you can learn how to manage the $8 an hour employee, at the smoothie stand, you can manage the most of them. So I would say a lot of it depends on your background, too. We had one classmate who went to work he was foreman at a wire extruding plant. He's got some interesting stories, but he's actually now started a company. But I think he looks back on that, so that was some of his best learning ground. So, other questions? Yeah.
How do you allocate the resources amongst the partners, as in the finance, the manpower, or the time for various activities such as market analysis or raising the finance, or even the structuring the organization? So how do you allocate the resources amongst all the partners? So is it decided, or how do you do it?
We use rock, paper, scissors. I mean, if one of the partners or if one of your co-founders is particularly good at something, then that's easy. You know, or it might be, you know, what you least dread. I mean, maybe both of you are terrible at finance, but someone's got to build a financial model if you're going to raise, you know, 6 figures of money, even if it's just guesswork. So you just have to work it out. I don't have a more thoughtful.
Was your question more towards financial resources or skill resources?
How do you decide?
How do you distribute all the resources, as in the
As the mind power, or?
Yeah.
All the resources.
The individual partner puts in his time or the financial resources which are available with the new company. So how do you divide them for market analysis or the existing operation of the company? So how is it divided?
Well, if I may, to Chris's point, if you have a significant overlap, you probably have the wrong partners. So that really should not come into play significantly. I mean, if you got your team around here and you know you sort of divvy up the responsibilities and there's an odd man out, he's an odd man. Get rid of him. I mean, seriously, you just shouldn't have that many overlaps. If you do have some areas that is, you know, Chris saying, you got to just, you know, hey, somebody's got to take and you know, pay the checks, and somebody's got to do, you know, manage the whatever, you know, landlord or something. Yeah, you just flip the coin on those. But for the real significant stuff, the best teams that I've seen, that's just not really an issue.
I wasn't kidding about Myers-Briggs. We were opposite on 3 out of 4. We thought that was good.
Yeah.
So we had one place where we could really communicate well, and the other 3 things we had really different skill sets or really different interests, and it served us well.
Now, did your partnership? I mean, you went through some tough times in closing down your goddess. Did you
She's
guys?
still like my best friend.
Yeah.
One of my
That says a
closest
lot.
friends. Yep.
If you can go down happily.
Yes.
Yeah.
Did any of you face the issue of kind of large upfront out-of-pocket expenses you had to finance, like, let's say, corporation, intellectual property?
Yeah.
Finance personally?
Yeah.
So, you know, Fred started a couple. I've done a couple. Scott, you've done a couple. You can recoup those expenses. I mean, large is relative, but you know, you can do all that stuff for, you know, under 40 grand. I mean, you can even do it on a shoestring on the internet if you really want to save a lot of money. But you can recoup that from your investors, either in your seed round, or you might be asked to roll it into the round beyond that. But you can get that money back, unless you've really spent the money stupidly. But if you take advantage of the advisors in the network that you're in, you know, your legal bills are in line, and intellectual property and all of that stuff, incorporation, in my experience, you can get the money back if that's important to you, or you'll have the opportunity to roll it into more equity in the company.
Similar. We, other than our sweat equity, we would defer major expenses on both e-greetings and Lexi. I mean, we probably spent more on Lexi just because we now have some more. But you know, in some sense, we just sort of arbitrarily picked a date and just said every expense after that date, we're going to pay ourselves back, and everything before that we won't. And we didn't have one investor that said, "Oh, no, pick a later date." You know, nobody didn't care.
We didn't have a lot of significant upfront costs with the airline, for example, but we also didn't have substantial net worths at all. And our principal investor wanted us to be personally committed. He ended up lending us money that we could then personally reinvest into the venture. And so it was truly our money. It was a commitment that we had to repay him. And something along those lines might work for you as well.
It kind of depends also, though, if, for example, you went out and got a patent on something and you had to spend, you know, 50 grand or 100 grand on that or something, and that was built into your evaluation, then I don't think you'd get the money back. So it kind of depends on how you want to treat that.
Did you find professionals who would be willing to work on a contingency basis?
Well, you'll find people that, like the law firms will work on a deferred billing basis. So they'll get caught up at the first financing or the first meaningful financing. Maybe pay them back half at the seed round and the rest at the larger round. And if it doesn't work, then, they don't get paid.
That's a good question, too, by the way. There's, to follow on Chris, there's not a single professional you can work with. The attorney's probably your biggest expense in terms of professionals. There's not a single firm out there that if you can sell them on your idea, which is a good sort of basis to see if it's a decent idea anyway, you can sell them on the idea. There's not many firms that won't do one of the couple things for you. Give you the first 10 grand as kind of honeymoon period. We've had that, or 50% off in the first $50,000 in billing, whatever. I mean, and then get it back when you get funding. Whatever you need to get done. If they believe in your idea, they want you as a long-term client.
So the CES, we have names of some attorneys who've specifically come to us and said they're willing to work with some startup companies. So.
Almost every attorney will at the big firms out there. We all know the stories of the Googles and what have you. They all start with nothing. So that's, it's business development on their part, and they know a certain number of them aren't going to work out. So.
Yeah.
Kind of along the lines of the financing of the partnership, when you form it, I'm just curious if you've had experience of whether it's important to have 50-50 stake for both partners, regardless of what you bring to the table, and what investors think about that split between the partners.
I've done the company that I sold 50-50 because we were best friends and we both felt we brought complementary skills to it. Company I'm doing now where I have a key partner, I got the company going, it was my idea, and I probably could have done it just on my own, but by personality, I've given two other guys very large stakes, but it's not 50-50. So I think it just, unfortunately, it just depends. But those are back to Fred's comment and Caroline's of sitting around and talking. Those are pretty big things you got to settle out. The investors will, as long as it works for, if there's 2 of you or 3 of you, the investors will defer that you guys have figured it out. They won't. There's not like some formula they're going to hold up to it. But if you haven't settled it and one of your partners is muttering to the investors that they're pissed, that's the recipe for a problem. So obviously have those tough conversations on the front end. And, as Fred alluded, you may start with 4 people and only 3 of them do it or only 2 of them. And, that's probably what was meant to be. I wouldn't advise you to conduct yourself as a jerk, but it's probably for the best that you learn that on the front end. Then, 6 months in and you find out that either to the question of, financial resources or, amount of time they can dedicate to the business, have those conversations on the front end.
Yeah.
And you're talking about the size of the founding team. At what point would you say it's too large?
I've got my own views, but it's
6 people too large, would you say? Or
I don't know that you're going to find 6 people out of the box. I mean, in my experience, it's 1, 2, 3, and then one of the nice things you can give out, since we were talking about funding and you don't have a lot of money, is you give them co-founder status. So because there is this kind of arbitrary date that you just set when the company started, even though you probably were thinking about it in the shower for months or maybe even longer than months. So to Fred's point, you may say that you'll give it to the first 10 people. You'll make them all, they're the core team, even though in your heart it was you and your friend or you and 2 friends, what have you. So I wouldn't get hung up on, how big is the founding team.
My second company, I thought it would be fun to I had this great idea, and I thought it'd be fun to do it with all my best buddies and some family members and whoever else I happened to just walk by that day. And I think
How did that work out, Fred?
It did not work out well. There were 6 of us, and I would not recommend 6, or even more than 2 or 3. So it's almost impossible. Is most of what we've talked about up here tonight. I think it has to do with sort of communication and really kind of exploring who you are and how does the team work together? Do you all have complementary skills? Managing that with 2 is hard, 3 is really hard, and anything more than that I think is impossible. So.
Yeah, by the time the team gets to 6, it's got to be pretty clear that like you're doing sales, you're doing marketing, you're doing product. It can't be like, 5-year-olds playing soccer where everyone goes to every meeting and does everything. I mean, that's a formula for a disaster. And I think that's what Fred's talking about. There has to be like 1 lead dog or 2 lead dogs who make the decisions.
Sure.
And then how do you start talking about splitting the equity at that point? If you add a few more people and give them co-founder status, I mean, do you have any advice on when and how to have that discussion?
You're talking about like Chris's model where you bring people in? And...
Right, sure. At what point, at whatever point you split up the equity early on, do you do that right away or do you do that?
It depends. I've seen it done a couple of different ways. So you can divvy up the 100% pie among that core team, or if you're the person with the idea, you have the 100% and you're doling it out from that. I've seen it. It can work any of those ways.
There's some pretty good rules that I'm not there. I mean, this has been done a lot. This is one of those cases where you don't need to reinvent the wheel. If Chris's situation is similar to what Tony and I have now. When we started eGreetings, we started it here, very much an organic process. Neither one of us can claim we had the idea because it just sort of evolved. With the current idea, Tony was looking at ideas and I was looking at ideas, and we said kind of go ahead and explore them. We'll each kind of treat each other as a consultant. But the idea we end up with, that person gets 10% more right off the bat, and then we'll split the rest 50-50. After that, if you bring in people, like we were talking to bringing in a third or a CTO, as Chief Technology Officer, right off the bat, and pure negotiation at that point in time. So we were offering 15%, and some of the CTOs wanted a third, and we ended up in that low 20% range. So, but pretty much after that, it goes down real fast. So your fourth employee might only get, if it's a senior position, might 4 or 5% at most. And by the time you get to the 10th employee, you're talking not even 0.25%, 0.5%, unless you finally brought in your CTO or something like that. But
try to transition to a shares discussion rather than a percentage discussion.
Yeah,
fairly early on.
Good luck on that.
Yes.
Focus on your percentage.
Related to the same question, do you have any clause in the agreement whereby, like, if one of your co-founders leaves the team or drops out, then his stake gets reduced or something? How do you go about it?
That'll be governed by our restricted stock agreement, and it really depends how ready for prime time you want to make your company and how soon you want to do that. If you take venture money, you'll be forced to do that. Either, if you're lucky, you'll be fully vested, and if you're more traditional, you'll have some kind of vesting on your stock, even as the founder. And in your restricted stock agreement, it'll say what happens if you leave or don't leave. But I think back to my first company, we were fully vested. We never had a restricted stock agreement, and we would have crossed that bridge when it happened. But if you know going in that one of your partners might leave, then you should have that kind of discussion up front and not wait for a venture capitalist, or usually that will be driven by the more professional money that comes in to put those kind of restrictions on a partner. Because the bottom line is you don't want a partner freeloading on the hard work of the rest of the team. You want to kind of do what's fair. So that's why those agreements show up.
I'd say do it up front. Just have that discussion. That should be part of the discussion that you're having with your partners, because you really want that to protect yourself. If you die, and what happens to your stock? What your family? What rights do they have? And it's not just if somebody screws up and you want to fire them or something. I mean, it's just all sorts of things that these restricted stock agreements really kind of go into. And your attorney, which you can get for free, as we talked about up front, that'll be part of what you want to do.
I have time for one more question.
I want to ask another question about growing your team and employees. So it's pretty easy and generally pretty obvious who you're going to start with, who your partner is going to be, and you get the idea off the ground and you start doing the legwork. Where do you go to find employee number 3, 4, and 5, or 6, 7, 8, whatever it may be? Where do you find those guys and how do you target them?
I've had the best luck just working through friends. I mean, if you can hire folks who you've either worked with before or who've worked with friends of yours who can vouch for them, that'll, in my experience, and unfortunately I've been hiring people for a lot of years, you're kind of 1 and 2, even as smart and good as you think you are at hiring, if it's someone who just walks in off the street. I mean, most hires, as many don't work as do work. So my advice would be for those initial people, if you can get them through referrals of friends, unless you need some particular unusual talent that's never going to be in your network, I would go with your network, your friends.
Same. Tony and I were pitching this idea early on and met Mark Andreessen and his team, and we were saying, there's going to be email is going to be this full multimedia thing, and we need you guys to build this player into your browser that you're inventing here. And so they got all excited, and they brought their chief technology officer, and between hello and goodbye, Tony and I, who walked out, and he said to me, do you understand anything he said? Not a word. So Tony says, we need to get one of those. So seriously, and then we said, okay, where do we get a chief technology officer? And we started asking around classmates, professors and VCs, and we got a great CTO out of that process. And network.
Any last words of wisdom to folks who might be looking either in the near future or down the pike to an entrepreneurial career?
Well,
have lunch with Chuck.
Have lunch with Chuck, yeah, definitely. Your professors. If you feel it burning, something you really just know you want to do, you're gonna get lots of this. If any of you have ever read Joseph Campbell and sort of the journey of a hero's journey and things like that, there's lots of barking dogs at the entrance of these dark tunnels, right? There's fire or something out there that looks like we can't do it. And the moral of that story every time is when you walk through it, they just disappear. They really weren't there to begin with. They just were what is in your brain scaring you away. That's if you want to do it, you're passionate about doing it. No matter what happens, whether or not the Scott's airline didn't work out like you hoped to, or you're inventor of Google or something. It's the risk is not really there. I mean, you'll parlay that into something else. And the one thing I would say to couple that with, don't take anybody else down with you. So only take money from people that can afford to lose every penny you've ever taken from them. And then, if what they're investing, whether or not it's $1 million or $1,000, if it's a rounding error on their balance sheet, that's the person you want investing in you. And then you give it your best shot, and if it doesn't work, you just pick up and you go to the next one. So
I think that's great advice. I would also say just know why you want to do it. So you can always keep that in mind, because you are going to go through a lot of rough places. But it was a phenomenal experience, and to your point, I mean, our company failed by sort of financial standards, but I only look at it positively from all the things I learned from it.
Yeah.
I would just say, if you can, do your venture with a friend or someone that you feel a common passion with, because there are those ups and downs, and I've always been grateful that I've had someone else to share those ups and downs with.
Awesome. Well, thank you.